Never underestimate a little person from China, especially when he is a SWAT officer. But the arrogant Frenchman, he seems to have no idea what respect is. Not only did he search Liu Jian, who came from afar to assist in the case, he also confiscated his passport immediately. After a moment of humiliation, he then brought Liu Jian before Superintendent Richard. But even as a superintendent, Richard still looked down on Liu Jian, who was handling a cross-border case. Nevertheless, Liu Jian cooperated and handed over his pistol. Then he coordinated surveillance on a drug lord from Taiwan in the hotel lobby. Their original plan was to catch them all when Liu Jian met with the French drug lord. But the French drug lord had not yet appeared, and the disguised French police officer, posing as the lobby manager, brought two prostitutes to the meeting scene. Under the temptation of the two beauties, the big drug lord suddenly changed his plan on the spot and directly returned to the presidential suite at the top of the hotel. Faced with this unexpected situation, Liu Jian immediately returned to the monitoring room and asked Richard what was going on. But Richard confidently claimed that everything was under control. Just as Richard finished speaking, a prostitute stabbed a hairpin into the big drug lord's chest. Liu Jian saw this and rushed over immediately, easily knocking down the 3 bodyguards guarding the presidential suite door. Then he quickly subdued the prostitute who was about to continue the attack, using a silver needle to restrain her hands and feet. Next, Liu Jian administered 2 injections to the big drug lord, temporarily stopping the bleeding. But while he was calling an ambulance, Richard put on plastic gloves and used Liu Jian's pistol to kill the struggling drug lord. Then, Richard casually killed the prostitute nearby. Liu Jian was stunned in place. Fortunately, he reacted quickly, and by the time Richard's men arrived, Liu Jian, who was on the phone, had already disappeared without a trace. Furious and humiliated, Richard then began indiscriminate shooting. But when he reached the balcony, he found that Liu Jian had already escaped by climbing walls and flying down to the floor below. When Richard and his men arrived at the room downstairs, Liu Jian returned unexpectedly, re-entering the surveillance room with a surprise attack. Although Richard had already ordered all surveillance to be shut down, his men still missed one machine. Thus, Liu Jian effortlessly obtained evidence of Richard's crimes. But just as he rushed into the corridor to evacuate, he was ambushed from behind and in front by 2 teams of black police. Liu Jian had no choice but to rush into the neighboring laundry room, blocking the door with a cabinet. But after opening the window, he found that there was actually a burglar-proof window installed outside. At this moment, Richard was forcibly breaking down the door with his men. After a burst of gunfire, his men kicked the wooden door with great force, shattering it completely. Seeing that the room was empty, Richard immediately locked onto the nearby laundry pipes. Under Richard's threat of force, he had no choice but to reluctantly stick his head in. Just as he looked up, he was kicked down the pipe with an invisible kick. However, this kick also exposed Liu Jian's position. Worse still, the waiter upstairs at this moment also threw down the quilt that needed cleaning. Cunning Richard sprayed alcohol on the inner wall of the pipe, then directly turned the pipe into an oven. Just as Liu Jian was struggling to hold on, he keenly heard the sound of a grenade pin being pulled. Liu Jian grabbed the grenade with one hand, then leapt into the air, throwing the grenade into Richard's sleeve. Unexpectedly, the brutal Richard paid no regard to his subordinates' lives and pushed the fat man into the blazing fire in the pipe. Before he could catch his breath, the sent by Richard quickly arrived. Liu Jian, who had been suppressed by heavy firepower, finally got a chance to confront the enemy head-on. After fighting, he realized that these tall French black police officers were no match at all. Since that was the case, he had to let them each experience the power of the socialist iron fist. Liu Jian moved like lightning without a hint of hesitation. In the blink of an eye, he completely overpowered this group of people and successfully arrived at the hotel lobby. Richard's men, who had been waiting here long before, saw Liu Jian appear and, without a word, drew 2 submachine guns and started shooting. After a few seconds of waiting, they quickly emptied all their bullets. Liu Jian took the opportunity to rush to a nearby billiard table, kicked it into the air with a flying kick, and directly hit the gunmen's heads with the billiard balls. When Richard chased to the door, Liu Jian had already disappeared without a trace. Furious and humiliated, he immediately ordered his men to chase by car. Little did he know, Liu Jian was hiding on the roof just a meter away. A few minutes later, Liu Jian hitched a ride with the black police to downtown Paris. After rinsing his tense mind with fountain water, Liu Jian took out his own necklace, which contained the secret note left by the state. He broke the necklace to take out the note, but found only a string of numbers and a place name inside. He inquired at the subway station ticket seller and successfully found the coded cabinet inside the station. Unexpectedly, 2 police officers chatting happened to block the cabinet door. After a moment of hesitation, Liu Jian forced himself to ask them to move aside. But when he opened the cabinet, he found only a mobile phone inside. Liu Jian took out the phone and then opened the second cabinet based on the number on the back of the phone. Embarrassingly, the opened cabinet was still at the feet of the 2 police officers, and what was inside made all 3 stare wide-eyed. Liu Jian reacted swiftly, quickly drawing the silver needle from his wrist to restrain their movements. But the sound of fighting soon attracted other nearby patrol police. Before he could draw his weapon, Liu Jian quickly slipped into the crowd and escaped from the station. Meanwhile, Richard, who had searched all night without success, was forced to meet with the Chinese ambassador who came to negotiate. To clear his own suspicion, he showed the ambassador a secretly taken photo of Liu Jian at the scene, as well as the standard pistol he had obtained from him. He then shifted all the blame onto Liu Jian. The ambassador and the liaison officer naturally did not believe his lies and immediately demanded the surveillance footage from the scene. Just as both sides were at an impasse, the liaison officer suddenly received a strange call. Although the liaison officer remained calm, the cunning Richard ordered his men to wiretap his phone. Meanwhile, Liu Jian, who had not received any specific instructions, had no choice but to return to the Chinatown rendezvous point. While eating and waiting for the liaison officer's call, a nearby prostitute unexpectedly approached, asking to use the restroom inside. Liu Jian refused, but the bold Anna directly decided to squat at the door to solve her needs. Not wanting trouble, Liu Jian had no choice but to lead her into the restroom. Unexpectedly, in the next second, Anna let out a soul-stirring scream inside. Even the little fat guy who came to pick up the goods looked on with envy. Liu Jian had to awkwardly grab a few packs of snacks and send him away. Then he used the same method to chase Anna out of the rendezvous point. After a brief moment of panic and adrenaline, Liu Jian finally received the liaison officer's call again. They agreed to meet at a boat dock by the Seine River. Although Liu Jian was already cautious enough, the liaison officer had long been followed. After boarding the boat, Liu Jian explained what had happened and handed over the tape that could prove his innocence. But just as the liaison officer was about to tell Liu Jian the evacuation route, a bullet suddenly pierced through his throat. A few seconds later, two black police officers cornered Liu Jian from both sides. Knowing that surrendering was a dead end, Liu Jian waited for the officers to approach and then pulled him forward, causing both to collide. He then smashed the glass at the stern of the boat and leapt underneath. However, the two SWAT officers had already been waiting there for some time. As a top elite in special operations, Liu Jian was still able to hold his ground despite being surrounded from both sides. First, he kicked one into the river with a shadowless kick, then he used a side throw to send the other into the cabin. At this moment, Richard also arrived by car at a nearby bridge. He saw Liu Jian and immediately raised his pistol to open fire. Seeing that he missed, he then moved to the other side of the bridge to wait. Unexpectedly, the highly skilled Liu Jian had already climbed down under the bridge, passing through a sewer connected to the bridge, and successfully escaped to the nearest subway station before the pursuers could board the train. Although he narrowly escaped, the tape was once again in Richard's hands. He returned to the rendezvous point, Liu Jian, who scraped his arm, sewed his wound with his left hand. A kind-hearted boss took the initiative to go out and buy disinfectant for him. Seeing Liu Jian's difficulty in moving his hands and feet, Anna, who was outside inviting business, voluntarily offered to help him sew the stitches. Learning from the previous lesson, Liu Jian did not choose to refuse this time. But unexpectedly, a few minutes later, a group of thugs responsible for monitoring the prostitutes broke in, and they slapped Anna. Although Liu Jian was very upset inside, he was being chased and decided to remain silent. Unexpectedly, the thugs then extorted 500 francs from Liu Jian, claiming he was delaying Anna's clients. Although he was already furious inside, Liu Jian still paid without causing trouble. But what he got in return was more ridicule. Since that was the case, he had to make them taste the shame too. Just after he defeated 3 small thugs, a local boxer with an unclear face swaggered in. This person not only had well-developed muscles and defined lines, but his height and strength completely dominated Liu Jian. After taking 3 of his punches, Liu Jian realized he was just a weakling. A flying kick made him kneel, followed by a heavy punch that knocked him out. At this moment, Richard's men happened to pass by, and upon discovering Liu Jian fighting inside, they quickly took out an assault rifle hidden in the back seat. Before he could react, the shop owner who just entered was shot to pieces by the black police. Soon, a dense rain of bullets triggered the gas tanks inside the shop. In the blink of an eye, the once clean and tidy shop was instantly turned into a scene of apocalypse. And the assassin entering with a gun also met his end. After killing the black police, Liu Jian immediately fled the scene with the shop owner's body. Looking at the suspicious eyes outside the window, a terrified Anna could only hold the shop owner's belongings and follow. After burying the shop owner's body, Liu Jian was completely lost in confusion. So Liu Jian decided to return to the starting point of the mission. He took out the hotel address and asked Anna to lead him there. Unexpectedly, Anna on the opposite side was shocked. It turned out that last night he also went to the big drug lord's presidential suite, but because he was scared, he hid in the bathroom, and thus narrowly escaped. After hearing this, Liu Jian immediately wanted to take Anna back to the embassy to testify for himself. But unexpectedly, Anna directly refused, because her daughter was still in Richard's hands. So Liu Jian could only agree to rescue her daughter first. An hour later, Anna arrived alone at Richard's office. He lied that Liu Jian had kidnapped her to a hotel, and then escaped while he was drunk. Now Liu Jian should still be lying in the hotel bed. But the cunning Richard did not believe Anna's words, and he locked Anna with handcuffs to the radiator, threatening that if he couldn't find the person, she and her daughter would suffer the consequences. And when Richard left, Anna immediately used her beauty scheme. She told the guard, as long as he could buy her a sandwich, she would give him a free month of a fitness package. The not-so-bright guard didn't think much, and he left the office directly. When he returned again, the office was already empty. Jessica not only successfully escaped, but also brought back the lost videotape to Liu Jian. On the other side, upon learning of the trap, Richard immediately ordered his men to prepare. Half an hour later, when Anna and Liu Jian arrived at the orphanage where their daughter was staying, black police suddenly launched a surprise attack on the two. Just as Liu Jian was outnumbered and unable to defend himself, golden-haired Ji Mao, who was good at leg techniques, was about to deliver a fatal blow to Anna. At a critical moment, Liu Jian quickly turned off the dormitory's lights. When the black police turned on their flashlights, except for Liu Jian, who had a bloody nose, the dormitory was already empty. It turned out that Liu Jian had already taken Anna and escaped to the corridor. Then he tore down the curtain, quickly fixed it, then used his legs to hook the lock, and jumped out the window with Anna. Although his reaction was quick enough, Anna was unfortunately shot by the black police's bullet. Liu Jian immediately took Anna to the hospital. Fortunately, after emergency rescue by the doctors, Anna finally escaped the danger of life. Looking at Anna lying on the hospital bed, begging himself, Liu Jian did not say much at this moment, but drew a silver needle and sent Anna into a dream. He took off the necklace from Anna's neck, then made a call to Richard. Richard, looking panicked, came to the window, and then realized Liu Jian was actually downstairs at the police station. Seeing Liu Jian approaching aggressively, Richard, who had long been traumatized, immediately ordered his men to sound the alarm. Liu Jian swaggered into the police station, then kicked the guard at the door with a whip kick. Next, he quickly took out a flagpole, easily knocking down all the guards who couldn't react in time. At this moment, a large group of police suddenly rushed down from upstairs. Liu Jian had to change his route temporarily. He sidestepped and slipped into a side door next to the stairs. But after locking the door, he found that, inside, the police practicing judo were many times more than the ghosts at the Hongku dojo. Used to big scenes, Liu Jian calmly took off his coat, and a battle immediately began. Once again, Liu Jian, outnumbered, looked like a fierce tiger. His ancient bloodline fully activated, he was now invincible. And when the reinforcements arrived and broke down the door, only the injured, screaming in pain, remained in the training ground. Soon Liu Jian descended from the sky, entering the second floor of the police station via elevator. Then he kicked the switch with a flying kick, thoroughly shutting the anti-theft door. At this moment, the only one blocking Richard's door was the most powerful golden-haired Jin Mao. But when Liu Jian took 2 steps forward, Jin Mao's leg technique expert brother blocked behind him, and when he turned his head again, the 2 people on either side disappeared at the same time. The next second, the younger brother suddenly charged out, launching an attack on Liu Jian. A series of high whip kicks even forced Liu Jian to retreat repeatedly. The younger brother kept engaging head-on to attract fire, while the older brother circled around behind and suddenly launched a sneak attack on Liu Jian. Under the combined attack of the 2 brothers, Liu Jian momentarily fell completely into a disadvantage. But his experienced mind quickly found a way to restrain his opponent. Liu Jian deliberately led the younger brother into the office cubicle behind him. The tightly arranged desks and chairs made it impossible for the opponent to land a kick. Once in battle, it was entirely Liu Jian's domain. Soon, Liu Jian made the younger brother dizzy and disoriented, but he still wanted to repeat his old tricks, leading Liu Jian to an open space to continue fighting with kicks. But at this moment, everything about him was seen as a flaw by Liu Jian. Watching his brother die in agony, the older brother then charged straight at Liu Jian like a tank. Liu Jian used his most skilled inch punch to counter, but in the face of absolute strength, a direct confrontation would have no result. But Chinese Kung Fu's strength lies in soft overcoming hard. After Liu Jian dodged a heavy kick from the opponent, he seized the opportunity to twist his knee. Having overcome the last obstacle, Liu Jian finally broke into Richard's office. Unexpectedly, this scoundrel used Anna's daughter as a shield. But at this moment, Liu Jian was unstoppable. As Richard's taunting words fell, he stiffened and could no longer move. Meanwhile, Liu Jian gently took out Anna's necklace, and he asked Anna's daughter to leave the room. Looking at Richard's terrified face, Liu Jian told him that the injection he just gave was called the Dragon's Kiss. Because the silver needle had pierced the dead point, within a minute, all the blood in his body would rush to his brain, soon causing bleeding from the 7 apertures, and he would die painfully. After explaining, Liu Jian pulled out the silver needle and left the scene without looking back. The villain Richard, who had committed evil all his life, walked to the end of his life in despair. Later, Liu Jian returned to the hospital and removed the silver needle from Anna's neck. Seeing Liu Jian unharmed and his daughter sleeping on the sofa, Anna finally shed tears of happiness. At this moment, she also welcomed a new life with Liu Jian's help.